welcome to this week's video on painting the portrait and the figure. This week I want you to be working from a live model, and that's the key aspect to this week's exercise. We're going to start working with, and what we've learnt from our previous weeks, the massing of the major light and the major dark, thinking about then massing those major lights and darks in a colour from our Zorn palette if you're going to work in colour, and then playing with some extra colours into those lights and darks and creating interest in those two patterns, and then introducing the light and darker tones to start to create more form like we did in the third week. This exercise, as I said, is that I want you to work from a live model. So either someone at home, if you can, and that will sit for you, or working in a mirror and setting yourself up that way that you can be standing back, comparing your work to the reflected image. The most important thing about this week is how you're posing, positioning your sitter. And that's where I want to talk to you about the lighting and the angle to which they are sitting, either straight on, 3/4, profile. This, in combination with how the subject matter is lit, is a key aspect to making this exercise either easier or harder for yourself. Most portraits are painted with the light coming from about 45 degrees in front of their model. The light reaches most of the visible form, leaving only a fraction of the form in shadow. The light here is low enough to illuminate both eyes. When the lighting is arranged so that the nose shadow merges with the shaded side of the face, it's called Rembrandt lighting. This lighting technique results in a lighter triangle on the cheek closest to the viewer. In this example by Rembrandt, though, you can see that this triangle is on the cheek furthest. In this next series of photographs, I have raised the light to be above, higher than where it had been before. It is still coming from 3/4, but you can see in these examples it creates deeper shadows in the eye sockets and a very distinct nose shadow. This is a common way of lighting that you see Meldrum and his followers use. In these last two photographs, I have got the light directly in front of the model. Here you can see that it reduces the darks to just small areas and flattens the form of the face. I would encourage you to try and use some of those first examples of lighting either yourself or your subject matter, as these will be the easiest to work with. Here you can see how I've set up my easel with my mirror. It's only a small hand mirror, and I have this on my easel in front of my easel where I'm working. My fixed focusing point was approximately 8 feet away from the canvas. As we've done in a previous week, I start by massing the light-dark pattern that I can see. This time I'm conscious of using a light and a dark in a colour that represents my skin tone and that I can see in my reflection in the mirror. This next stage is principally for those of you who are going to be working in colour. You will notice areas within your skin tone that vary. Some areas will be redder, some areas more yellow, possibly even areas that are violet or grey. This is your opportunity to place some of those colours into your portrait. But bear this in mind. Try and mix these colours to match the tone that you have painted your light mass in and the tone you have painted your dark mass in. By doing that, you'll maintain the light and the dark massing that you have established in your first part of working. I would recommend that to the end of this stage, starting to play with a bit of extra colour in there, that this is maybe where you stop and leave it either for a few hours or come back to this portrait the next day. Here you can see that I've started to break my little dark mass into darker areas in my hair, defining my dark side of my face with darker tones from the background. I also want you to take note of, and this is relevant to whatever medium that you're working in, is how soft and broad I'm keeping my marks. I'm not going in for any real hard edges, nothing very definite except for maybe that shape across my shoulder, and maybe a little bit of then beginning of some detail there in my clothing. Those sharper details in the face will come later. Now I continue to refine the shapes and the smaller forms that I can observe, making smaller adjustments with smaller brushes or smaller marks if you're working in pencil or some other medium. Don't be afraid to make big changes at this period too, and make sure that you give yourself plenty of time and rest in between parts that you're doing. You'll notice at the end of this sequence that the eye on the left hand side was not still quite right, and that I end up wiping it out completely to come back to it at another sitting at another time. So there you go. Give it a go. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to produce a masterpiece. The one thing that I would say to do differently to what I've done here in the video is to spread the stages out a little bit more. As you can see towards the end of this, I'm not happy with the positioning here on my eye, and that I have taken it completely out to walk away from the painting to come back to it another day. And that was because I was pushing it just a little bit too quick, pushing it beyond the point where I was starting to get tired, and that I should have actually stopped, walked away from it a lot earlier and come back to it either another day or at least a few hours later. So I'd encourage you not to try and just do this portrait in one sitting. Maybe work over a couple of sittings over consecutive days, and be aware to not push yourself right to the end stages like I have here, or that I've started to attempt here. The one thing I had started to observe last night, that I had lost sort of the right shapes there in the eye, and also that I've pushed that eye too high up as well. It actually was much better earlier on in the process, and in some regards I should have left it much more like what it was rather than fiddling around with it, which is what I started to do. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me before I see you on Zoom. But until then, take care and good luck.